Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Jason Rea. I am the Chief Learning Officer at Founding Forward. Founding Forward is the 501c3 nonprofit charity of the Union League of Philadelphia. Our focus is civic education, history education, and we do that through programs for teachers and students. We do that with programs like this, and of course, the historic collection and archive at the League House and the League House itself, all coming from this tradition that is the values and the principles upon which the Union League of Philadelphia was founded in 1862. So thank you for being here. This is the second of technically 7 summer speakers programs that we're going to have. 5 of them are going to be here at Liberty Hill. This is number 2. We're also going to have one at Tarsdale later in July. We'll have one at Union League National in August. The 5 that are here at Liberty Hill are all connected to teacher programs that we are running here. We have 5 week-long seminars for teachers from all over the United States. This week, it is Reconstruction. It is focused on the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments, and their lead scholar is somebody I think many of you know well, Dr. Alan Gelzo, one of the most recognized and important scholars of Lincoln and the Civil War. And this is, I think the 3rd or 4th or 5th time he has run one of these seminars for us. So we're thrilled to have him back. We're thrilled to have the teachers. And we are thrilled to see some of them are here for tonight's talk. Just before I introduce our introducer, I just want to remind you that everything that Founding Forward does, all of these programs, these teacher programs that we are doing, we'll have 350 teachers this summer attending programs. All of that is funded by donation to Founding Forward. And I have specifically been asked to remind you that before Independence Day happens next week, the end of the fiscal year happens on Saturday. Yes? Sunday, technically, but, Saturday. So please, if you have been thinking about a gift to Founding Forward, if you can make it before the end of the month, you will make many of my colleagues very happy. But you will be doing amazing work in supporting these programs that will have the ability to change the course of our nation in the coming years as we grow and do more programming like this. So enough of that. I want to introduce to you my good friend, Paul Snitzer. He is the new chair of the Speakers Subcommittee of the Education Committee. He's been a longtime Education Committee member, and we've invited him tonight to tell you about tonight's speaker. So, Paul?
Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey was born into slavery on the eastern shore of Maryland in February 1818. Not allowed to attend school, he taught himself to read and to write in the streets of Baltimore. At the age of 20, on September 3rd, 1838, he boarded a northbound train dressed as a sailor, and in less than 24 hours, Frederick arrived in New York City. Soon after, he would adopt the last name of Douglass. In 1845, he published his first autobiography, The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. He later bought a printing press and ran his own newspaper, the North Star, and in 1855, he published his second autobiography, My Bondage and My Freedom. During the Civil War, Douglass recruited Black men to fight in the U.S. Army, including 2 of his own sons, who served in the famous 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. It was during these efforts that Douglass became a friend of the Union League of Philadelphia. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Mr. Frederick Douglass.
Good evening, citizens. I am here with unusual diffidence. I thank you for the warmth and earnestness of your welcome. I have sometimes seen myself referred to as an orator, but for the life of me, I cannot tell why that reputation is accorded me. I have excited some in years past in the telling of a simple story of human bondage, such as 1,000 other colored Maryland boys could have told with equal skill and effect. One would think if I could make a speech, I could do it right here in this lovely venue. But you have called me to speak, and I have obeyed your call. And so I'm so happy to be invited back by Founding Forward. When I was last here, I was at Valley Forge, and now I see there's a great marriage of two great organizations. And it seems to be quite splendid. As I was spoke earlier this morning at the 11:30 hour, and set in on some of the sessions. The teachers were quite well engaged. You all should be very grateful of what you accomplish in teaching. I see a few of the teachers here in the audience. I hope that more would come. I assured them that I would not say the same thing twice. But I did want to speak certainly briefly about the remarks I made with them this morning on Reconstruction and talk about some of the other things important. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't pay some homage to George Washington. We know he was a key part of the reason we established Valley Forge and the work there. I was just recently in Annapolis on Saturday. They called me back to recount the time in August of 1876 when I went to the Maryland State House and recited from memory the resignation speech of George Washington, in which he gave up his command of the American Army, in which he willingly and peacefully released his incredible power back to the civilian government. And so I was quite proud to be doing that on last Saturday. They have changed the State House a little bit. They now have a statue of yours truly at the State House. And as I've been talking to some of the members of the Union League, you all have put up a grand photo of me in your facility. And so I certainly thank you all for the tribute. And so certainly here to talk about Reconstruction. Of course, we know that we could not get to Reconstruction unless we had a civil war, a conflict that would ultimately decide the beginning of the end of slavery in this country. And I think the best way that I could start this journey of Reconstruction is to, first of all, think about the soldiers who sacrificed so much to save the Union. And it was actually during Reconstruction, 1871, that I went to the cemetery in Washington, D.C., and I gave a speech talking about our unknown loyal dead who had sacrificed so much. And so I'll start there, and then we'll have a conversation about President Lincoln, President Johnson, and some of the obstacles that we faced during Reconstruction and how we tried to push the momentum along to have the country on a new path to liberty. And so this speech that I gave at Arlington Cemetery in 1871 is honoring the unknown loyal dead. We are sometimes asked, in the name of patriotism, to forget the merits of that fearful struggle and to remember with equal admiration those who struck at the nation's life and those who struck to save it, those who fought for liberty and justice and those who fought for slavery. I am no minister of malice. I will not strike the fallen. I will not repel the repentant. But if my right hand forgot her cunning and my tongue cleaved to the roof of my mouth, let me never forget the difference in the parties of that terrible, protracted, bloody conflict. We're asked to forget a war which has filled our land with widows and orphans, which has made stumps of men in the very flower of their youth, which has sent them on a journey armless, legless, maimed, and mutilated, which has piled up a debt heavier than a mountain of gold, swept countless thousands of men into bloody graves, and planted agony at 1,000,000 hearthstones. I say, if the war is to be forgotten, in the name of all things sacred, what shall men remember? We have come here not to save manly courage, save what it displayed in that noble cause. But let us never forget that victory to the rebellion meant death to the republic. Let us never forget that the loyal soldiers who rest beneath this sod flung themselves between the nation and the nation's destroyers. Thank you. Yes. And so it was this Civil War. From the time that I had escaped and found myself in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and meeting Mr. William Lord Garrison, that he would be introducing me to our Constitution, that he would be describing the Constitution as a flawed document that should be torn up and rewritten. You see the humor in it, yes. That we could change the country by mere moral suasion. And on the other shoulder, I had John Brown, who was convinced that we would not end slavery in this country without a civil war. And as we know, John Brown was right. I had always believed in John Brown. John Brown, many people say he was a crazy man. But I had been admiring his efforts to go out and defend the free soil settlers in Kansas, and then to come back and do a raid on Harper's Ferry. And so it was after the Civil War, during the Civil War, that we immediately started to lobby President Lincoln to have the black soldier fight in the Civil War. We went to his cabinet members and we pleaded that the black man should have an opportunity to show his loyalty to the country. And they were saying, no, we can't have the black soldier fight. We said, well, why not? The black man fought in the Revolutionary War. The black men of Massachusetts, Crispus Attucks, if we were good enough to fight alongside Washington, then why would we not good enough to fight alongside McClellan? And of course, Abraham Lincoln, being the prudent and serious and honest boatman that he was considering all factors. And it took some doing. It took a myriad of things, including General Butler down at Fort Monroe in Virginia, to write a contraband clause that would cause hundreds, if not thousands, of colored men to make their way to Fort Monroe and claim themselves as contraband. That the first three that landed there at Fort Monroe, he took them into custody, and a few weeks later, 3 Confederate soldiers came to claim their property under the Fugitive Slave Act. And General Butler said, well, certainly our Constitution does say, and the Fugitive Slave Act says, that these colored men belong to you. The problem is, sir, gentlemen, that you have seceded from the Union. And so this does not apply to you. Now, if you would like to rejoin the Union, you can have your slaves back. And so there were all these factors that went into convincing Abraham Lincoln to make a prudent decision, including what we were doing. And of course, as we know, on the first day of January 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. And we were all waiting on this first day of January, and we were all very jubilant about it, and started to read and dissect the Emancipation Proclamation to see just what it meant for our freedom, and to try to understand why he was leaving out certain states and counties, Terrebonne, St. Bernard, the 48 counties of West Virginia, and so forth. Why would he do this? Is he freeing slaves at all? Well, what we didn't understand is that he had to make some calculated decisions. These were border states, and they still owned slaves. And because they were on the side of the Union, we didn't want to have them divest themselves of the Union, and so he gave them 100 days to make up their minds, hopefully have the end of the war. And so you see here the brilliance, the genius of Abraham Lincoln. I had been following Abraham Lincoln all since he was running for senatorship of Illinois. I hope there's nobody in the audience who think I ever debated Abraham Lincoln. That was Stephen A. Douglas, with one S, the lesser Douglas. But I did end up in the office of Abraham Lincoln after we started this volunteer army in which I took my two sons, Charles and Lewis, down, and they joined the 54th Regiment. We recruited 900 soldiers for the 29th Infantry Division in New Jersey. My son, Frederick Jr., was in the Mississippi Valley recruiting soldiers. They were all coming to wear the Union uniform and proud to show their courage. As a matter of fact, I had said in one of the speeches during Reconstruction, what the black man wants, that the war proved quite a bit to the world. Some said the black man would not work. Well, the army showed that they would work. Some said that the black man would not fight, that he was a perfect lamb, disposed to take off his coat and be whipped by anybody who wanted to whip him. Well, many people knew that there was a great deal of human nature in the Negro. Even Quincy Adams said, the Negro will fight when there is a reasonable probability of his whipping somebody. And so I'm recruiting soldiers, we're recruiting soldiers, and information starts coming back to us that the soldiers, our recruitment is falling off. Why is it falling off? We have a meeting of the abolitionists, and we find out that some of the promises made to us were not being fulfilled. Firstly, that we were not getting equal pay. Secondly, as I was standing there talking to Abraham Lincoln, that, sir, there seems to be no black officers in the ranks. And he promised us, of course, that we would get our equal pay. He offered me a commission. I said, no, sir, I don't think I will. I'm at such an age that I would want to join the army at this point. My sons are doing just fine. And there was eventually black officers. And then thirdly, sir, as I said to Mr. Lincoln, there seems to be no such thing as a black prisoner of war, that every colored man on the battlefield are immediately hung or lynched. And Abraham Lincoln, well, he said, well, this just shows the character of Mr. Lincoln. He said, I cannot go indiscriminately taking revenge on Confederate soldiers. Now, if someone can bring to me a Confederate soldier who has committed a war crime, I will bring him to justice. And so I took those answers back to the delegation, and then we started recruiting picked up. We explained that to our colored soldiers. And of course, it was not until June the 19th of 1865 that the final word ended up in Galveston, Texas. It took that long. This is the very beginnings of Reconstruction, that it would take that long for the Emancipation Proclamation to arrive in Galveston, Texas, and with Gordon Granger and the troops that were sent down there. And so then we had a second, if you will, independence or jubilee. And of course, now the question is, how will we guarantee our freedom? Well, of course, it's the 13th Amendment. It's sometimes, I mean, if you're going to be talking about our history, if you're going to be teaching our history, then this liberty, this independence that we won with the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation was in a series of stages. The Emancipation Proclamation, Jubilee with Juneteenth, and then the 13th Amendment, which literally gave us our citizenship and guaranteed and ended slavery. And so we could be celebrating all of these. We could have one big Independence Day for the colored man. But of course, as we know, after the second inaugural, after they had, well, I don't even know if this is possible in your time, that a president who has served a 4-year term with one vice president, in this case, Hannibal Hamlin, we would throw him out and choose another vice president, Andrew Johnson. But they really thought that he would certainly stand with the radical Republicans, that he would be firm on the idea that all black men are just as capable as the white, that they deserve the elective franchise, they deserve the vote, that this idea of Reconstruction is to totally reinvigorate the South. Well, as it turns out, Johnson, as I gleamed in his eye at the second inaugural, I was standing right there as out in the crowd with Mrs. Mosby, and I caught the eye. Well, Mr. Lincoln saw me, he waved. And Vice President Johnson, looking over his shoulder, caught the eye of me, and I saw a little window into his soul. And believe you me, there seemed to be somewhat a disdain for me. And then we lost our president with the assassination. And now we're going to find out if President Johnson is really a radical Republican. Will he really enforce Reconstruction, the Reconstruction Act, which includes making sure that those, the community leaders and governors and city mayors and such are all of a new breed that are intent on ensuring freedom, the end of slavery in America. And what does Johnson do? Well, he decides to create an amnesty for them, that we might allow them back into the fold without any recourse whatsoever. We were very upset about this. We said, this is a terrible start to Reconstruction. This is a terrible start. We started lobbying then. We got a coalition of people to go meet with President Johnson, just to find out, to put him on the record, you understand, about his stances on this idea of Reconstruction. And in talking to him, it proved that he was not. He had already gone down. I mean, he was from Tennessee. He had already gone down to Memphis and preached to the colored people that he was the Moses of the colored people, that he single-handedly, because Tennessee was left out, that he was going to free the colored men of Tennessee. That he was the Moses of the colored people of Tennessee. Well, in this meeting in which we went to visit with the president, I told him then, sir, you are enfranchising the enemy and disenfranchising your friends, your so-called friends. If you do not believe in their elective franchise, then you are not for the black man. In the phrase of the old abolitionist phraseology, I am for the universal, immediate, and unconditional enfranchisement of the black man in every state of the Union. Johnson was speaking of using the old test of, is the man a freeholder? Does he own land? He has a deed to his property. Then he can vote. Does he have a bank account? Then he can vote. Well, that was not enough. We wanted black men and women to have the franchise. And we found him and we exposed this, and then he was on the record about exactly how far he wanted to go in this idea of Reconstruction. And so, of course, you might, I'm sure all of you are great historians, you know, of his impeachment and such. And then we move on to our next president, and then President Grant, who I often said President Lincoln wrote and drafted the Emancipation Proclamation. It was Grant who made it a fact. He made it a fact, yes. But we were still fighting for this Reconstruction. As a matter of fact, during this conversation with President Johnson, he was saying, and this question came to us as the abolitionists, what will we do with the Negro? I said, do nothing with us. Your doing has already played mischief with us. He said, well, maybe they could migrate to wherever they want to go. They had said to me, they had asked me the question, well, do you want to go back to Africa? I said, well, I will not go back to Africa. I was born here. I will stay here. This is my country. I am a citizen. And so this idea that Johnson had adopted of some migration was absurd to me. That our idea of Reconstruction that the slaves would stay in their place in the South. The general order of that went to Texas, Gordon Granger, clearly said, henceforth, the relationship that was former as slave and slave master is now that of employer and employee. Stay where you are. Find a job. That's what I told the people of Maryland when I first went to Maryland in 1865. I said to the colored people, stick to the lower counties of Maryland and your agricultural pursuits. I believe that $100 in the country is better than $400 in the city. For those of you crowding the alleys and by streets of Baltimore, woe betide you. Sad indeed will be your fate. But how can they stay in the South? How can they how can they trust us with Reconstruction if we won't protect them? If Grant sent soldiers to the South to protect the colored people, then they have no choice but to leave. The banks that were set up, you see, they had assigned John Mercer Langston as the overseer of the Reconstruction Act. And one of the posts that was sent to me, or one of the assignments, was to become the president of the Freedmen's Bank and Trust. Now, the Freedmen's Bank and Trust was an institution of lending that was established, and by the time I took over, there were 13 branches across the country. There was about 55,000 or so people with money invested and millions of dollars invested. And they came to me and said, Mr. Douglass, we'd like you to take over the Freedmen's Bank. I said, well, I know nothing about, I'm a great speech maker, but nothing about ciphering numbers. They said, well, Mr. Douglass, certainly your reputation will bring some confidence back to the Freedmen's Bank and Trust, sir. And so I took it over and we did an audit. And here we find out that there's more money leaving the bank than is being invested. I put $10,000 of my own money in the bank, and it still goes insolvent. Money allocated by the Senate and the Congress to support troops, bullets, munitions, food, and such that they would need to be in the South dried up. Dried up, why? Because there's no civic engagement of the people. The people are literally losing interest in Reconstruction. And I can assure you that if your senators and representatives think that you are not interested, they're probably going to go in another direction. And so here we are with Reconstruction falling apart all around us. Well, I became very frustrated. The Constitution, which I had often spoke of in a beloved manner, I was having serious doubts about what this war meant and if it meant something positive for the future. I see here your mantra, a future rooted in liberty. I'd always said the past can only be so good if it serves the present and the future. And so, if your liberty is rooted in the future, that's a good thing. That you're trying to educate teachers and by proxy their children, that you're bringing them to a classroom and trying to teach them not what to think, but how to think. That they might be reading both sides of history and making up their own intelligent minds. This is what I learned in the first book that the gentleman who introduced me, he said I had taught myself how to read and write. I set up a shoe stand on the streets of Baltimore and shined shoes. 75 cents I purchased this book. As the men passed by, I would say, 5 cents to shine your shoes, sir, 1 cent to dust you off. It was 75 cents I purchased the book, Columbian Orator, in which I started to read about the arguments for and against slavery. That I would learn my first poem and recite the poem and become an orator. This is what we hope for our children. You all do understand, and well, this is an adult audience, so there are no children here, but we do understand that it is easier to build strong children than repair broken men. You know that, right? Yes. And so this is the message you should be passing on to your children, both boys and girls. I remember the poem. I frequently recite this poem even now from the Columbian Orator. You'd scarce expect one of my age to speak in public on the stage, and if I chance to fall below, Demosthenes or Cicero, don't view me with a critic's eye, but pass my imperfections by. Large streams from little fountains flow, tall oaks from little acorns grow, and though I now am small and young, of judgment weak and feeble tongue, yet all great learned men and women like me once learned to read their ABC. Yes, yes. I'll show you the distance from this podium and where I was born in Talbot County is considerable. And the difficulty in getting from the former to the latter is by no means slight. It was a struggle every step of the way. Even after escaping, there was danger at every corner. And so I made it. I'm here. And so I wanted to maybe give you one more tribute of oratory, and then we might have some questions. I always enjoy the questions and finding out what's on the mind of the American audience. And the reason I'm doing this, I don't think the professor is here. He was speaking to my understudy before he left. He told my understudy that he would be leaving. But as I was talking to the gentleman who was telling me about all the great things that the Union League is doing and the archives of history that you all have, the the relics of Mr. Lincoln and such. I don't have such an archive, but I do have this. About 3 months after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, a package arrived at my door and with a letter from Mary Todd Lincoln. The letter saying, Mr. Douglass, my beloved husband and our fine president, wanted you to have this, his favorite walking stick, in recognition of all that the respect that he had for you. And so I'm carrying the stick not because I'm so old and feeble, but because it's quite a nice cane. No, Union League, you cannot have my cane. Yes. And so before we get to the questions of the day, I could certainly do many speeches of the hour, what the black man wants, and so forth. I thought I would go back and pay a tribute to Mr. Lincoln in 1876 on the 10th anniversary of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. They were erecting a monument in Washington, D.C. I don't know. I have talked to some of the teachers and so forth about this monument, the Emancipation Monument, which depicts Abraham Lincoln standing with his right hand over the Emancipation Proclamation and his left hand extended, offering a hand up to a particular colored soldier, a colored a man, Archer Alexander. If anyone tells you that this is a nameless person, you can correct them. Archer Alexander. Archer Alexander was a brave man who risked his life to save Union soldiers. He overheard his master with a plan that they were going to saw the timbers of a trestle as the Union soldiers were coming across, and he ran the 10 miles to warn the Union soldiers and ended up in jail. And for this bravery, when Mr. Elliott, Greenleaf Elliott, who was in charge of the funds to raise this monument, you see, it all started with Charlotte Scott. When she heard about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, that she would take her last $5 and take it to her masters and say, take this and erect a monument in the memory of Abraham Lincoln. And then they would give the money to William Greenleaf Elliott, who was in charge of an organization, and they raised $17,000 with the pennies, nickels, and dollars of colored people. And then they went on a vacation to Paris, and they had heard about Mr. Ball, who was a great sculptor, and they went into his gallery there, and he had a similar monument already mapped out with the same colored man on his knees. Even more subservient, and the rumor is, or whatever, is that the reason that he made this was based on an incident where Mr. Lincoln had gone to an encampment with former slaves, and they rushed him, and one of the slaves bent down to kiss his feet. And Mr. Lincoln said, no, do not kiss my feet. I do not deserve that kind of praise. And so they told Mr. Ball, said, this will not do. We need a more respectable model for this person. And so they chose Alexander Ball. They chose Archer Alexander. And so the monument still stands. I was just there in Lincoln Park on June the 19th of this year of our Lord, 2024, to a large audience of people like yourselves, and I recounted the speech. Frederick Douglass remembers Abraham Lincoln. And so this is what I said on that April day in 1876. Fellow citizens, I warmly congratulate you upon the highly interesting object which has caused you to assemble in such numbers and spirit as you have today. We stand today at the National Center to perform something which is to go into history. Harmless, beautiful, proper, and praiseworthy as this demonstration is, we cannot forget that no such demonstration would have been tolerated here 20 years ago. That we're here in peace is a compliment and a credit to American civilization and a prophecy of still greater progress in the future. I refer to the past not in malice, for this is no day for malice, but simply to congratulate all upon the contrast between now and then. With the long and dark history of our bondage behind us, and with freedom, liberty, and progress before us, I again congratulate you on this auspicious day and hour. We're here with the stately pillars and the majestic dome of the Capitol looking down upon us. We're here with the foliage and flowers of spring for our church, and all the races, colors, and conditions of men for our congregation. We're here to express as best we may our grateful sense of the vast services rendered to our race, to our country, and to the whole world by Abraham Lincoln. Fellow citizens, truth is proper and beautiful in all times and in all places. It must be admitted, truth compels me to admit, that Abraham Lincoln was not, in the fullest sense of the word, either our man or our model. In his interests, in his associations, in his habits of thought, and in his prejudices, he was a white man. He was preeminently the white man's president, entirely devoted to the welfare of white men. You are the children of Abraham Lincoln. We are at best his stepchildren, children by adoption, children by the forces of circumstance and necessity. For while Abraham Lincoln saved for you a country, he delivered us from a bondage. Therefore, it shall be asked what we have to do with the memory of Abraham Lincoln and what Abraham Lincoln has to do with us. The answer is, though he loved Caesar less than Rome, though the Union was more important to him than our freedom or our future, under his wise and beneficent rule, we gradually saw ourselves lifted from the depths of slavery to the heights of liberty and manhood. Our faith in him was often strained and taxed to the uttermost. He was assailed by abolitionists. He was assailed by slaveholders. He was assailed for not making the war an abolition war, and he was bitterly assailed for making the war an abolition war. He calmly and bravely heard the voices of fear and doubt all around him. But he had an oath in heaven, and there was not power on earth to make this honest boatman violate that sacred oath. But dying as he did, by the red hand of violence, killed, assassinated, not because of personal hate, for no man who ever knew Abraham Lincoln could hate him, but because of his fidelity to union and liberty. He is doubly dear to us. So, fellow citizens, I end as I begin in doing honor to our friend and our liberator. We may calmly point to the monument erected in the memory of Abraham Lincoln. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So we have a few minutes for questions. We have two microphones, myself and Kristen on the other side. If you have a question, we would ask you to raise your hands. Just a reminder, you got about 2 sentences. If it doesn't end with a question mark, you failed. So please, there are teachers here. Everybody must pass. So if you have a question, please.
Mr. Douglass, thank you for your incredible life that you've given to us. In our modern times, we have something called Wikipedia. And I just found out recently that you chose your own birthday, February 20th. Could you tell us why you chose that day?
No, actually, you said 20th. Actually, it's February 14th. And the reason for this, of course, is that I was taken away from my mother before I even finished nursing. She was sold to a plantation about 12 miles away. I never saw my mother during the light of day. slave master came to me around I was 6 years old and said, "Freddie, your mother is dead." I was not able to attend her funeral nor know the cause of her death. But I do remember of the time she did visit me. She once came and brought me a heart-shaped cake, and she called me her little Valentine. And so for that reason, I chose February 14th. Yes, ma'am.
Other questions?
Yes, right here, sir.
Thank you, sir. Would you tell us about Booker T. Washington and maybe how your lives intersected, if they did at all, and your opinion of him in general?
Yes, Booker T. Washington. We talk frequently. He was a part of the thinkers about what we would do with our new freedom, and he had his ideas. He was certainly an educated man. I'm a self-made man. He ended up inviting me to Tuskegee when he took over Tuskegee, and I risked my life to go down to Tuskegee and give an emancipation speech, an inaugural speech. Uh, but all in all, we were very close. As a matter of fact, we would vacation on the Eastern Shore. As we would go to the Eastern Shore, and we would our families would congregate and have a good time on the beaches down there. My sons ended up buying property on the Eastern Shore. They were building me a house that I never end up seeing. But Washington certainly was a friend of mine, and as a matter of fact, as I understand from what I'm told in the modern era, that my great-grandson married Booker T. Washington's granddaughter. And so if there are any descendants walking around, they would be from that union. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. All right, ma'am.
At all play into that for
Certainly it did. Certainly it did. Part of the Reconstruction Act were schools and churches. Even in teaching Sabbath school, one of my main objectives, not only to bring colored men to Christ, but was to teach them how to read and write. So schools were an important part of that. And even in our Jubilee or Juneteenth celebrations, we would often showcase new schools in the colored community and how we could educate our citizens. When I first moved to Washington, D.C., right now, where part of Arlington Cemetery was a colored town of former enslaved people. Hundreds, about 300, live there. And I would frequently go there, and we would have lessons on teaching colored people how to read. Now it's the Arlington Cemetery, but we were definitely engaged in reading. Ma'am, once you can read, you will be forever free. Yes. 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 Yes,
Hi,
sir.
Mr. Douglass. So Johnson was kind of walking back some of the liberties in voting with the checking account and freeholder requirement. So a future rooted in liberty, the requirements today of an ID, is that prudence or is that a walking back of liberty from a voting perspective and from your perspective?
Well, the franchise is ultimately important. After the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, which would give us equal protection under the law, our next objective was the franchise, the elective franchise. And I was in Seneca Falls standing with the women, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Mrs. Mott, Susan B. Anthony, also on the scene, the colored women as well, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth. We were all speaking out on the franchise for the women. You see, it was Mrs. Mott who was actually invited into the longhouse of the Haudenosaunee, and this is where she realized that the women don't have rights at all. They only have great privilege. You have a fine car, fine clothes. You show up at a party in fine clothes. You ride in a fine carriage. None of these things are rights. These are only privileges. And in a society, a patriarchal society, they do not belong to you. But in the longhouse of the Haudenosaunee, they saw the Indian women sitting at the table with the men making decisions. And so this is what brought them to the table of the McClintock House in Waterloo, where they sat down, Elizabeth Cady Stanton with her writing capabilities, and they drafted the Declaration of Sentiments with 19 amendments to say this is what the rights of women should be. And above them all, the elective franchise. And so I was standing beside the women for that franchise, universal suffrage. Well, when the 15th Amendment passed, the overall sentiment across the country was that the woman would have to stand aside. Susan B. Anthony, they thought that I had somewhat betrayed them. But I was not only fighting for their right for the franchise, but my daughter and my wife's franchise as well. So I certainly would not have forsaken the women. As a matter of fact, when I realized that they would not be able to go through this window of opportunity, then I said, let's keep things going. But they didn't want to speak to me. Much momentum was lost in the woman suffrage movement. Now, ladies, do you have the right to vote now? You do? And what amendment brought about that? What amendment did you add to the Constitution? Oh, thank you. I was beginning to think you did not have the franchise. I mean, this is important. This is what we're trying to teach our teachers and our children, to be civically engaged, to not just say you are a patriot when you can't even recite the preamble, when you do not know where your rights are derived. You must know. I mean, I know what the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment is. Those amendments that I helped contribute through my civic engagement, I know what they are. If someone stops me at the ballot box, I know I'll whip it up. The 15th Amendment, sir, move aside. I'm here to vote. And so you should be prepared as well, ladies. Don't let someone stop you at the ballot box and send you back home to find your Constitution, and then by the time you get back, the ballot box is closed and you've lost your franchise for that year. This is what it means for us to be civically engaged in American democracy. For us to be actually living out this idea of our independence. I don't know how much time we have left. One more question, and then I'll have a sentiment to leave with you all. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Douglass, for a terrific talk. You've made specific and less so references to Juneteenth.
Yes.
Help us understand the importance of that event and what is now a holiday in the United States, because it seems not so much misunderstood as ununderstood or non-understood. And I'd be grateful to have your perspective on it.
Yes, he wants to know my ideas on Juneteenth and the meaning thereof, and what it might mean for you all today. Hopefully, if you are going to any Juneteenth celebration, or as we called it in our day, Jubilee, we were celebrating this because, I mean, they were doing everything possible, humanly possible, to not end the war, to not have the Emancipation Proclamation apply to every state of the Union. Even my brother Perry, my sister Eliza, and other of my relatives were sold to plantations in Texas, the furthermost part of the country, to keep them away from the emancipation. And so it took Gordon Granger that long to arrive in Galveston and say, it ends here. And so that was the big deal about why we were so excited that it finally got to the furthest most part of the country where they would be free people. And so that sentiment started to spread across the country as Jubilee, and we started to celebrate. And Reconstruction really gave us the opportunity to celebrate that freedom. But as Reconstruction started to fall apart, then all of our celebrations in the public square were pushed back into the shadows. When you have people planning to lynch other people for showing their freedom, then you have to be somewhat cautious about how you celebrate your freedom. And so I'm so happy to see now that it is a holiday that you celebrate in this country. It doesn't make me want to stay here, but but yes, you are celebrating the Jubilee, the Juneteenth, and I think it's important. I think you should continue, besides all the other things that we did during Jubilee of strawberry cake and soda and music and all these things. Again, we want to, sir, talk about the schools that are available in the colored community, the businesses, what colored people might do to make up their minds about what political party they're going to support and be involved in as far as their civic engagement. These are the things that, how they can, again, take this letter, which is not a dead letter, and add new amendments to the Constitution. This is, in my opinion, what Jubilee should be about. All of these kinds of serious discussions going on as well as fireworks. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. And so, as I was telling the teachers, and I will leave this with you as my final sentiment, someone asked the question of the meaning of our liberty and what I meant by my speech, what to the American slaves is the 4th of July. Why I was somewhat delayed in answering the invitation of the Rochester Anti-Slavery Sewing Society, and ended up arriving on July the 5th, the day after, to give the speech in which I praised our founding fathers. I praised George Washington. I would certainly have been looked upon sideways if I had not mentioned the great courage of George Washington at this great site. But as I said in that speech, our founding fathers were brave men. They were peaceful men, but they chose revolution rather than peaceful submission to bondage. Now, George Washington has lived and he has died. Our founding fathers have lived and they have died, and they have done their work, and they've done much of it well. Look at you. Their plea to England has succeeded, and you reap the benefits of their success. This 4th of July is yours. But what I would say to you is this Constitution is not a dead letter. But it is from the standpoint that this is on paper. The question is, how will you live this liberty? This has 3 equal branches of government. What shows up in your body politic as you go through the day? I say that there are 4 boxes that demonstrate a man's rights. The ballot box, the soapbox, the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. You're all sitting on 4-legged chairs. This is your body politic. As long as those 4 boxes are setting equally, you are sitting on a pretty stable democracy. But if you do not live out the Constitution within yourself, if one box gets this high and the other one is this high or this low, or one gets a hole in it, then you might find yourself sitting on unstable democracy. How are you living your democracy? If anybody says that Frederick Douglass was criticizing what our founding fathers started, tell them, think about it again. Are you civically engaged in our democracy? That would be the question for everyone to ask themselves as we leave tonight, this grand occasion. Thank you so much. I am yours truly, Frederick Douglass. Thank you. Thank you. Mhm.